This is the new Speedybee All-in-One F405 V2. It comes in two versions, one without a heatsink and one with a heatsink. No matter which one you choose, they both come with the same accessories. You get an LED strip back, a USB-C extension port, and a parallel power expansion board. On top of that, you also get a practice PCB board, which is basically a copy of the flight controller. That is pretty cool. And of course, you get a solid selection of gummies, screws, cables, and all the usual bits and pieces that Speedybee typically includes. When it comes to weight, the version without the heatsink comes in at 9 grams, and the version with the heatsink weighs 13 grams. So, to review these, I'm going to do it the way I think makes the most sense, by installing one of them in my 3-inch Seeker frame. The biggest difference between the old V1 version and the V2 is that it now has a built-in 9-volt back with a dedicated DJI port at the front, meaning you no longer need an external back like you did with the older version. Both versions are rated for 3 to 6 S batteries, but with the heatsink, it supports up to 45 amps continuous current and 40 amps on the version without the heatsink. For my 3-inch build, I'm going with this one. What you'll notice with this version is that the dual heatsink pulls away a lot of heat, so the solder tends to get a bit sticky and harder to flow properly. One good thing about this 8 megabit AIO is that it comes pre-flashed with BlueJ, not BL Heli S, so it supports bidirectional D-shot right out of the box. It also supports the external clock feature for the gyro, which is included in the latest version of Betaflight. The solder pads are decent, a good size overall, but I wish the motor pads were oval instead of rectangular. Some manufacturers are starting to do that now, and I find it makes soldering a bit easier. Coming back to what I mentioned earlier about the heatsink pulling away the heat, here's a good example. Even at 400 degrees Celsius, the pad still doesn't get hot enough to solder properly, and it takes a couple of attempts before it comes out clean. The capacitor included in the kit is a wet electrolytic capacitor. The polymer capacitor I'm using here has become more and more common in FPV builds lately. So maybe it would be a good idea for Speedybee to include those as well, like they already do with the Speedybee F405 V2 stack. The AIO has 4 usable UARTs and support for an LED strip and buzzer. It also has pads for a compass and analog FPV system. Both of the 5-volt pads, intended for the GPS and the receiver, are actually 4.5-volt pads, meaning they're powered from USB as well, which is really convenient. A lot of AIOs these days come with plug connectors for everything. I'm not really a big fan of that. I prefer soldering things directly to the flight controller. But for the GPS, it actually would have been nice to have a dedicated port, especially on this type of frame where the GPS is usually mounted on the top plate. But overall, this AIO is pretty nice to work with. It has plenty of UARTs and basically everything you need. There's a USB-C port on the side, and on top of that, it supports configuration via Bluetooth using the Speedybee app. Now, before we wrap up this video, I'm going to take it out for a quick flight. One thing I find particularly interesting with all-in-one boards is taking a look at the noise profile to see what it looks like, since the flight controller and the ESC are so tightly integrated. To log Blackbox data, this AIO has 8 megabytes of internal memory, and to check the noise profile, I do a few full throttle runs to capture the full range. Another thing I noticed is that out of the box, the current meter isn't calibrated, so that's something you'll have to set up yourself. If we look at the log results, we can see that there's no more electrical noise than expected, and it won't be a problem to tune this quad properly. All in all, this AIO will probably become just as popular as the V1 version. Maybe the V3 version will come with a built-in ELRS receiver, who knows. The current price from Speedybee is $57 without the heatsink, and $62 for the version with the heatsink. I'll post all the specifications and links to both of these products in the video description if you want to check them out. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.